The release of Batman the Arkham trilogy on the Nintendo Switch was something we were all supposed to be really excited about, and certainly I was, until I played Arkham Knight, which was the game that I was expecting to run like absolute trash, and it lived up to that expectation. It really was abysmal at launch. Now, since that release, we've been waiting eagerly for an update, and it's been complete radio silence. They've even updated the other two games, and the thinking was that potentially they'd just abandoned ship on this one and taken the L. But no, we finally have a huge, and I mean absolutely huge update. This took about an hour and 20 minutes to download, and it looks to rectify at least some of the issues that we saw. So, is Batman Arkham Knight all patched up on Nintendo Switch, or is fixing this performance a riddle they just can't solve? Well, let's find out. Let's start off then by looking at how the game launched. As we can see, frame rates were pretty bad, but it became abysmal when you were riding around in the Batmobile. It really was what I would class as unplayable. Visual quality that represented as close to the game version of Soup as you could possibly imagine, muddy textures, masses of aliasing on the edges of objects, and it wasn't much better when you were playing in handheld. The whole thing was just a mess. It's going to take us a while. We're going to go through all of the different elements, interiors, exteriors, looking at textures to see if there has been any change. We'll start off then on the interior, looking at the frame rate. Now, as you can see, it's running at 25 to 27 frames per second, which isn't perfect, let's be honest. This is an interior that has a lot of NPCs, so I would expect a slight hit, so we'll have to have a look at a few different examples. What I will say is frame pacing is slightly better. It feels less jittery than it did before. There clearly is much overhead when it comes to things like character models and resolution. Just take a look at this guy. The aliasing on the model is very evident. It's got jaggy edges, it's low resolution, as are the assets around him, like the carpet under his feet and those filing cabinets in the background. Whether or not this is an improvement over the original, I'm not entirely sure, but it's clearly not quite where we'd want it. I'm wondering if resolution is the main area that they've had to reduce to get things running a little more smoothly. Shadows have also seen a significant hit. Look at the character shadow of Batman here on the ground. It's now like the old circular shadows that you used to see back in the day. And so we go to the Batmobile where all of those issues were. Well, most of them. And initially as we're walking down to it, we're looking at a locked out 30 FPS. Even rotating the camera keeps that frame rate. I am positively excited as we set off into the city. It doesn't take long, however, before that frame rate absolutely tanks. It's abysmal. As you can see, not only are there frame stutters, there are complete drops. Momentarily, the frame rate will almost lock while it struggles to load the assets from memory. And I had heard a lot of talk about how this game just does not fit with the Switch architecture. And I think this really showcases that. We're looking at a massive patch of potential fixes, but it can't maintain 25 frames per second while driving around the city. And I'm not one to say that a game is unplayable if it suffers from a few drops here and there, but for me this is, if you're trying to actually do any of the car-based sections, this is still unplayable. And what you're getting is a fully priced product in an unplayable state, which is annoying. It goes down to 18 frames per second very quickly, and you can see that 18 is maintained and even dropped. It actually reduces down to 17. I think it even went down to 16 frames per second, but when you're averaging 16 or 17 frames per second in what's supposed to be a high-speed, skill-based segment on a product that you've potentially paid full price for, we can argue till the cows come home about whether or not we need new hardware, but when a new release is getting 12 frames per second, which this does actually get down to, and the game that's actually been released is several years old, you have to ask the question if it's time. Now that's a completely different topic entirely, and as we know, there are developers who can work the Switch into doing some things that it probably shouldn't be able to do, but as it stands, these guys are not one of them. Not only is the frame rate so low, if you look carefully at the background, many of the effects don't load in time. Things like fog will suddenly appear, or the textures on walls will gradually stream in and out. I'm sad to say that Arkham Knight is still in an appalling state. Now I am trying to find some redeeming qualities of this update, and it's not easy. Even when we look back at the way the game launched, I think I've managed to hit lower frame rates whilst in the Batmobile after the update, which makes no sense to me at all. Movement around the city is about as bad. Gliding around, I now see drops down to 15 frames per second, where again, I hadn't hit those lows before. It really is absolutely terrible. And it's a shame because there will be people that are playing it on Switch for the first time ever, and it just kind of annoys me a little bit, I have to be honest. Now, fair play, they are trying to patch it. Please let this not be the last of the patches. Have a little chat to your mate Saber Interactive or some of the other developers who really know how to use the Switch. You're going to have to swallow your pride on this one, because if this is the best effort after 2 months, it's terrible. If anyone's considering picking up this for Night, now is not yet the time to do it. I apologize if I come across as a bit harsh to the developers. I know you're working hard to get it where it should be, but this is not it. One slight plus is potentially the load times are slightly better, but everything right now on the Switch is a negative. Let's have a little look at the handheld, see how it plays over there. Perhaps all of these issues don't exist when playing in handheld mode. Yeah, it runs even worse in handheld. Oh dear, this really is not good. I'm seeing big drops, at least down to 15 frames per second when leaving the street level and going up to the tops of buildings. Usually those were the areas where it seemed to run okay. I'm really sad to say that I think they may have actually made many of the elements worse. Whatever they've done behind the scenes, they haven't released patch notes, so nobody has a clue. And I think we're going to have to wait for at least 1 or 2 more patches before we get the finished article. Right now, if you're considering picking up the game on Nintendo Switch for Arkham Knight, absolutely avoid it. It's a real mess. So that's it for the end of this episode. Hopefully it's been of some use for you. Sorry that it was potentially a little bit negative, but I like to think that it's useful as well. And let me know down in the comments what you think of this hot mess. Thanks to our Patreons, our members, and all of you that enjoy the content for all things Switch all the time. Keep it Switch up. Cheers, guys. See ya!